Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce and the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association virtual forum focusing on climate action by Manitoba's small and medium-sized enterprises for enhancing resilience and reducing carbon. My name is Elizabeth Saftiak. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. On behalf of our team at the Manitoba Chambers, the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association, Novel Futures, and the International Institute for Sustainable Development, we are delivering our webinar from Winnipeg today. However, we recognize that we have participants from across the province who have joined us. Manitoba is located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you to the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association for hosting today's webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jack Winram, Executive Director of MIA, to bring greetings.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you to Manitoba Chamber for this collaboration and webinar and all the work that went into making this happen. Thank you, Darren Swanson, as well. So Manitoba Environmental Industry Association, not only a voice and a promoting organization for those who work in the environmental sector, but we're also a sector council under the Manitoba Workforce Development for providing education and awareness on important things that are impacting businesses, especially those who work in the environmental sector. And one of the things before us right now is a lot of talk about sustainability and green and ESG and what all that means. A lot of large corporations have started to or have adopted sustainability practices and are getting ready to report on ESG, which someday I believe will be mandatory. For now, it's voluntary. And so as part of this effort, I was talking with Chuck Davidson from the Chamber about how we could help educate SMEs about all of these things. And so that is the purpose of this webinar today. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Before we begin, some minor housekeeping. I would ask that you please keep your microphones on mute. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will do my best to monitor the chat throughout the webinar. We will also be recording the session for our internal use. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to send a private message to Corey Werner on our Manitoba Chambers team, and she will do her best to help you. Our forum will be divided into 3 instructional sections and an opportunity for broad discussion. First, we will share information on assessing risk and enhancing resilience. We will then present on reducing carbon via the circular economy. And our third informational component will cover using nature-based solutions for climate action. At 12:30, the final 30 minutes of our forum will allow for MIA members to share your experiences on climate action. And please feel free to hold any questions that you have until that segment as well. Before I welcome our subject matter expert to share his insights with you, I would like to talk briefly about the reason we have embarked on this initiative. Our goal is to build awareness and capacity among Manitoba's SMEs on the importance of resilience to climate change and achieving carbon reductions. We also aim to learn about the good practice examples by Manitoba SMEs in taking climate action, as well as barriers and enablers encountered. It is critically important that we build resilient communities and a strong economy. Climate change adaptation means planning for and acting on anticipated impacts of climate change. Canada has a national adaptation strategy. It is a whole of society blueprint for coordinated action across the country, ensuring communities and Canadians are prepared for the impacts of climate change. Canada also has an ambitious goal to reach an emissions target of 40% below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. It is now my pleasure to introduce Darren Swanson. Darren is director of the Winnipeg-based consultancy Novel Futures Corporation and a senior associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. He has over 25 years of experience supporting sustainability issues, including climate change mitigation and adaptation. Darren has designed and facilitated numerous in-person and virtual forums globally for the United Nations, as well as locally for businesses, First Nations communities, and governments. He holds master's degrees in public administration and international development from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and in geoenvironmental engineering from the University of Saskatchewan. Welcome, Darren.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth and Jack, for co-hosting today's event. As a follow-up to a series of forums that Manitoba Chambers did start a few years ago, even before the COVID pandemic. So this is a good extension to the conversation here with SMEs across Manitoba. And it's great to see in the participant list a lot of familiar and new faces that we'll get a chance to hear from throughout the course of the day. Thank you, Elizabeth, for setting the stage too on the adaptation and the mitigation picture. Of course, because that's the key, the two sides of the coin that we're going to talk about a lot here today. And thanks for setting up the sort of the emissions picture as well, because this, I guess, sets. I'll spend a bit of time first just talking about a bit of climate context. And I know we have a lot of well-informed people here on the webinar here this morning. But I always like to start with this graph that the U.S. government has up on their website, because it really does help us see that we are literally off the charts right now. And this helps explain why scientists and politicians are to a degree freaking out, because we are off the charts. So we heard conversations this week in Switzerland, where the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and governments are trying to reach consensus and publish the report on climate impacts and climate change. And this chart is why. This is carbon dioxide levels measured in ice cores in the Antarctica. And so scientists have been able to gather a picture of what the carbon dioxide concentration has been in the atmosphere going back 800,000 years. So this is a picture of history, and you can see that over the course of history, carbon dioxide levels have never been above 300 parts per million until recently. So on the very far end of the figure, you see that we are now off the charts. At about 1950, we reached this 300 parts per million level, and now we are just moving higher here at about 400 parts per, or 420 parts per million. And this is the context. This is why people are so concerned, because things are off the charts. And this off the charts results in changes. So of course we know this is climate change. And just to bring it right home to just a Winnipeg context, where a few of us now are talking from here today, this is a graph of frost days in Winnipeg. So the number of days where the coldest temperature has been just below 0 degrees. So if you've ever been on the climatedata.ca website and played around, you can get this type of information for all communities. But what this is showing is the change occurring. So in the gray area, the historic climate essentially is telling us that we've had about 190 days in the past of these frost days where we've had below 0 temperatures. And now recently we're at about, I guess, roughly an average about 180 days of below 0 temperatures. But this is where things get interesting. Looking forward in the future, the global climate models are projecting for different scenarios, things are going to change. And what you see there are the range of global climate model projections. So in the red, if we do not do a good job of reining in emissions as a global community, it's possible that we could see the number of frost days in Winnipeg decrease to about 120 days by the end of the century, if we are not doing a good job of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that's a difference from 180 to 120 days. That's 60 days, that's 2 months. So this is quite a bit different. And in fact, colleagues at the University of Winnipeg, the Prairie Climate Center, right home here in Winnipeg, they are talking about by the end of the 21st century that Manitoba's summer could look a lot like Kansas and northern Texas. So this is quite stark. It means that this change would really present our kids with an entirely different climate to deal with, and it would necessitate a complete reworking of how we live and thrive in Manitoba. So we're looking at rising permafrost, thinning ice, more forest fires, changing ecological conditions, more extreme weather events, significantly less snow cover at times of the year, and greater risk of flooding. And this has real and lasting impacts on Manitoba businesses, and but also creates opportunities as well, as we'll talk about. So that's a bit of the picture now, and sort of looking at really just a quick sort of check-in, I guess, at this stage for everybody that's online. So I really want to pose a question to you guys, and this is a poll, our first sort of use of polling. So if you have your mobile device handy next to you, you can just simply take your camera and scan the barcode, and it'll take you right to the Slido poll. I'm sure some of you have already been through this now. You can get online, just snap a picture of that. If you don't have your phone next to you, you can just open up a browser on your computer, and you can go to slido.com and just type in climate action. And what we want to do is just ask you, as a business, so in your business, what climate change impacts are you most concerned about right now in your business or in the clients that you serve as a business? So just let's see what's the budgets. So finances are going to be a big part of this. We got flooding, we got drought. And again, for those of you, just you can either open a browser, slido.com, climate action. All right, we got lots of things that people are concerned about. So we got legislative changes, no winter ice roads, the extreme weather issues we've got on people's minds, regulations, financing. Yeah, okay, financing is becoming a big issue, financing both for carbon reductions, I'm assuming, and also for adaptation. And climate-friendly practices, supply chain disruptions. Okay, that's top of mind for a lot of people, which makes sense in this conversation here, working with Manitoba businesses. Okay, it looks like everybody's getting a pretty good handle on the polling. We're going to use this throughout the event. And if you keep your phone just beside you, the polls will advance automatically as we go to some different questions. All right, so let's kind of just move on here quickly. Thank you very much for that, giving us a picture of what's on your mind right now. So keeping in mind too that climate action now for businesses is really a two-sided coin. So we're talking about the need to enhance resilience to the changes that are coming. And that's enhancing resilience both in business operations and in our products and services that we do offer. But the other side of the coin is reducing carbon. And that's reducing carbon in our operations of our business and also through the products and services that we offer, because they two reinforce each other. So we know that from the graph we did show of the changing frost days, that if we could do a good job of reining in emissions, we in fact could lessen the potential impact, the changes that could occur. So that then leads to the need to not have to adapt as much. So these all reinforce each other. So climate action is a two-sided coin, and we want to keep an eye on that. And that's going to be a theme for today. Another theme too, you'll see throughout, is that when we did visit with Manitoba SMEs a few years ago, we did hear a lot about the home game and away game of a business. So there are actions that a business can take in the home game. That's through the operation of buildings, facilities, vehicle fleets, and in supply chains, opportunities to enhance resilience and to reduce carbon. But also in the products and services that we create and offer, there are opportunities to enhance our resilience and to reduce carbon. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. As Elizabeth noted, we really slice this event up into 3 parts. So I'm going to go through and talk about climate action, number 1, in terms of assessing risk and opportunity and enhancing resilience. So that's our first climate action we'll talk about today. The second one will be about reducing emissions and via a circular economy. So it's a little bit of special attention today on the circular economy. And then thirdly, on using nature-based solutions to help with both And we're going to see some examples of that today. So we're going to provide a bit of information. We're going to check in with you through polls. We're going to have some stops for some Q&A. So please do use the chat space. If as we're going through some slides here and you've got questions, put them into the chat space, and Elizabeth will keep track of that. And then we'll make some stopping points here throughout to clear the deck on those. And the last half hour, we are going to turn the floor over to all of you to share examples of how you've taken climate action in these areas in your home and away games. So we want to hear from you what you're doing and how that's all working. And we do have a special guest in Alex Roundtree from WindPack that will join us to say a few words and help get the conversation started. So thank you, Alex, for joining us. All right, so let's move on and get right into the mix of things. And let's talk about our first climate action for the event today, about assessing risk and opportunity and using that information to essentially to enhance the resilience of a business. Now, I mean, the first thing to sort of keep in mind is that, of course, as a business, you're not just needing to adapt and be resilient to climate change. That is not the only thing on your radar screen, of course. So, of course, we were going to focus on climate change here. But as you know, as you've just went through over the past several years, pandemics can come out of the blue and disrupt operations and create change that we need to adapt to. There are other hazards out there as well: cyber threats, financial shocks. There's a real all hazards landscape out there to keep an eye on. And our friends at the Council of Canadian Academies, through this diagram, have showed us that they would like society and businesses to consider the full landscape, climate hazards together with other hazards, because that can help clarify where resources are most needed and really help to identify sort of addressing actions that can address multiple risks and also the relationship between risks. So a full hazard landscape is really quite important to keep a handle on. But thinking about climate change specifically, you've probably heard about two types of risks: physical risks and transition risks. And we can talk about risks and opportunities as well in the same breath. So physical risks in a climate sense are those risks and opportunities that arise from the direct physical impacts of climate change. So if you're being perturbed by floods, drought, wildfires, extreme heat, that's sort of causing you, those are presenting risks to you and potential opportunities that you will need to adapt to. But there are also these indirect risks called transition risks and opportunities that climate change can bring about indirectly. And these, you did bring these up in the word cloud just before this. Some of those are regulatory things. So when legislation is introduced to help address climate change, that can create both risks and opportunities for your business. Also legal risks from the safety of buildings under climate change, and also reputational risks. So we are seeing, and you are seeing certainly as being part of MEIA, that consumers are showing new preferences for products and services that are climate friendly. And employees are looking for companies also that are showing that they are climate friendly and taking climate action. So lots happening out there that businesses really need to sort of keep a handle on. So how can we go about addressing these types of detecting and addressing these types of risks and opportunities? So there's a suite of approaches out there that you may have heard of that can help you get a handle of these things. And those include things like strategic foresight, risk management and risk assessment, and business continuity. And in fact, these sort of three baskets of approaches are really quite sort of key in terms of working together in a really coherent and integrated manner. So that's something to keep an eye on, is these things can all be sort of juggled in tandem in an organization. Strategic foresight is about a process that can help organizations think about and envision multiple futures, and that can be then used to inform strategy making and business planning. And there are various techniques that are used, and we'll sort of touch on a few, called foresight to insight to action, and also scenario planning is another terminology, another technique. And we're going to talk briefly about those. There's also, on the risk management side and risk assessment, there are standards out there that can help an organization get going on this. Now, risk management and risk assessment is a bit more of a specific area. It gets more specifically to analyzing risks and opportunities and prioritizing them. And there are specific methodologies, including the ISO International Standard 31000 that we'll mention briefly in a bit, and also climate change risk assessment more specifically that can be used by businesses. And then thirdly, business continuity, that framework and process to really understand and have a plan for ensuring continuity of operations after a hazard has occurred. Okay, so these are all important to juggle. Let's just talk briefly about an example that kind of captures a few of these. There was back in 2015, University of Winnipeg led an exercise with a number of businesses and municipal authorities in northern Manitoba and Nunavut. And this was to study the supply chain and the risks that climate change are posing to the supply chain hubs. So it looked at the Omnitrax Canada Freight Services Hub in Thompson and the facilities there. This looked at the port services and facilities in Churchill and also the airport at Rankin Inlet. And that particular exercise did two things. It used a climate change risk assessment to look at the infrastructure and the risks that climate change physically pose on the infrastructure associated with these three hubs. And that used what's called the PIVC protocol. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Protocol for doing risk assessment, specifically on infrastructure, both physical, built, and natural assets. So that was used to study and understand how climate will affect the rail lines, for example, and permafrost effects on rail lines, the effect of storm surges and freezing temperatures on the port services, also permafrost issues up in the Rankin Airport and other sort of weather change and weather extremes that airports have to deal with. And it really looked at and provided some insights on what those authorities and businesses needed to do to enhance resilience to their infrastructure. But at the same time, this effort took a bigger picture view. It used a scenario planning exercise to examine the transition risks, those indirect risks that climate change may pose to the supply chain in northern Manitoba. And that was an interesting exercise because it considered things like when climate change, as is anticipated, resulting in a largely ice-free Arctic Northwest Passage, will result in potentially a lot more freight traffic in the northern shipping lanes than we've experienced, of course, in the past. And what that suggested was a double whammy effect, where climate change could put direct physical stress on the northern supply chain infrastructure and the need to adapt, but at the same time, an increase in demand on that same infrastructure and with higher expectations for performance. So that big picture scenario planning and also that detailed PIVC infrastructure risk assessment really helped to provide a lot of information. Now, what are these approaches? So the two approaches that were used in these particular cases were strategic foresight, and that was a foresight inside action type of a scenario planning approach. And you see the diagram on the right. So when we talk to the infrastructure, these supply chain hubs in the north, we just had a conversation about what were the key factors that really affect the supply chain hubs. We developed these plausible futures of how climate may change and how economic development may change in the north. And we talked to them about risks and opportunities that they may pose and the actions that could be taken. So that's a conversation flow. All right, and so that process was kind of used, and there is training available. So to get started on things like this as a business, there are online training available for these types of techniques, available from the California-based Institute for the Future. There's a link listed there. There's also some free recording training available with the Winnipeg World Trade Center on this that was done about a year ago. So there's things that can help you get started, and you don't need an expert to get going on this conversation in your business. You can really start to have this conversation about what the future might do and how you might need to adapt just by talking to your key staff and your key stakeholders. But if you really want to get mileage out of the process, it's good to, good to sort of seek the services of a qualified expert as well. The second approach that we'll just touch on here before we move on is about risk management and business continuity. And I did mention that there are international standards out there that are available to help organizations do this stuff internally. So risk assessment as an exercise in a business often can follow the ISO 31000 risk management standard. And so if you're a business, you're either seeking an expert that knows how to run that process, or you're having internal staff really get up to speed on how to do this to help lead that in your organization through these standards and the training thereof. But a specific one is the climate change risk assessment. And I mentioned the PIVC protocol as one specific methodology for that. And if you're wanting to know more about that methodology, the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training Program, the MCRT process, and I do see Kurt Hall here on the call, who's been involved in training for that, along with Engineers Manitoba and the Manitoba government. There's lots of really good resources and free recordings on climate risk assessment for businesses, and we have some links here provided for that. And that is a lot based on these international standards. And that follows a process. It's about identifying climate hazards. It's about analyzing risks. It's about evaluating and prioritizing these risks in a specific way and identifying adaptation options. As this is a bit more of a specific process, you'll want to seek the advice of an expert to build that internal capacity. And to help you get started, we've put in some links here where you can see some free recorded training webinars. And there's also a link there to where you can seek formal training in climate risk assessment using the PIVC approach at the bottom of the page. All right, so that was a lot to kind of to get through in a short amount of time, and that's what we're about here in this first part of the webinar here today. Just a quick check-in with everyone before we move on. And also too, we'll just feel free to use the chat space and warm that place up with your typing. If you do have questions, we'll do a quick stop here after this before we move on. But which approaches, have you dabbled with any of these approaches in your business, whether you've used them internally to assess climate risk, or are you providing a service that helps others do this to assess their own climate risk? Have you done risk management and risk assessment formally? Have you done business continuity planning? Do you use strategic foresight and scenario planning in any capacity? And I see we've got risk assessment and risk management processes are one type of approach that people have experience with. So we got a little bit of experience with each of the types of approaches that are out there, and that's really good to hear. From about, I guess, a third of the participants here responding right now. So that's a good, and I'm not, this is to be expected here, that we have most have this experience with risk assessment. So Elizabeth, I'm not sure if we got any questions yet, but I guess this is just a quick stop in if we do need to clear the deck on anything in the chat space. If not, we could move on.
No questions yet, just a lovely comment that the information is very valuable and interesting. So no questions at this time.
All right. Jackie, turn your camera on. Did you have something you wanted to bring up at this point, or a comment you wanted to make?
No, I'll save till closing just to bring up a couple of additional points, but he can keep going. Okay,
excellent. Well, thanks for the comments on the chat space, Laura. And yeah, we're aiming to sort of deliver some quantity and depth of info here before we turn the floor over to all of you. So as we're talking and you're hearing and seeing these examples of these approaches and tools, please warm up and be ready to share what you've been doing or questions you have in this regard, either along the way or as we get to that last half hour where we get into a lot of turn the floor over to you guys. Okay.
Darren, before we move on, there was a question about how the courses can be accessed.
How the courses can be accessed. Well, we're going to touch on that near the end of the webinar when Elizabeth and when you get to the climate action toolkit that the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce has available. So of course, this training course, the slides, and we have developed some good sort of 4-page primers that summarize each of these climate actions that we will make available to all the participants of this call in the week or two following the webinar, and those will be available on the website. So yes, they will all, you'll be able to get your fingers on these slides and some primer documents that we have prepared for you guys. And also that will have the links then to these other tools and approaches like the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training Materials, where there's a growing body of good available training for people. All right. Okay. Sorry. We're going to move on to climate action number 2. And this is now about carbon reductions and also about the circular economy, a buzzword that I'm sure you're hearing lots about these days because it makes total sense. Just a quick check-in here. Question as we set up the circular economy discussion. Little trivia, what % of the world's extracted resources are actually circled back into the economy? All right, what %? So of all the materials, minerals, ores, fiber, forest materials that we do extract from the earth and bring into the economy, what % stays in the economy versus, you know, disappearing into waste and just being stored in closets and backyards and storage areas? All right, okay, so we have a number of people respond. Let's just move on here and see what is the actual answer to this and how is everybody guessing? Yeah, everyone kind of got this one. It is not very high. Only 9% of the world's extracted resources are circled back into the economy. It's an extremely low amount. It means that 91% just does not get used. It gets wasted, incinerated, or it just sits after its useful life, it sits unused. And this really doesn't make much sense. And it doesn't make much sense because what we're doing and what that represents is what's called the linear economy. And that's on the left of this screen. So what it does represent, it's essentially that we use a lot of original virgin natural resources, and we circle very little back into the economy, and we landfill and incinerate most of it. Whereas the transition toward a circular economy is a different picture now. It is about using resources more efficiently, circling them back into the economy, and landfilling and incinerating less. So this really, you know, it just does not make sense to have only 9% of what we use circle back into the economy. It does not make sense. The circular economy is making total sense. And so it makes so much sense that organizations like Supply Chain Manitoba have spent a lot of time thinking about this and have produced a really nice report and set of resources on their website on establishing the principles for the circular economy. It's about maximizing the value of materials and energy. It's about reducing waste. It's about eliminating and using new resources in a minimal way, and achieving all this by bringing traditional waste products back into production, extending product life cycles, and using renewable energy, a whole source of approaches to really get the economy in a more circular manner in a way that makes sense. And in fact, there is, of course, the intuitive connection to carbon reductions in a more circular economy. Just through the efficiencies and the less the recycling and the less use of resources, we do have efficiencies. And of course, that's linked to carbon. And what the World Circularity Gap Report told us in 2021 was, in fact, that if we could reach this type of a circular economy even by 2032, the greenhouse gas emissions globally could be reduced by almost 40%. And that's quite dramatic. As well, the whole material footprint of the volume of material that we do use could be reduced by up to 30%, even by 2032. And what this approach can really help do is to help stabilize this 2-degree temperature rise that has the scientists and the politicians freaked out about, because that's where we get really off the charts in terms of past historic experience. So we really want to stay. You've heard this 1.5 degree Celsius terminology over the past few days in the news coming out of the UN meetings in Switzerland. We are really headed toward the 1.5 degrees that we were hoping as a global community to stay below. And now we're just really trying to mobilize the global community to really stay below this 2-degree Celsius level so that we don't get into completely uncharted territory where all bets could be off. So circular economy makes sense. And even the Canadian government, looking at plastics management alone, using circular economy, it could reduce CO2 emissions by about 1.8 million tons and also generate billions in revenue, and at the same time creating about 42,000 jobs within the next 10 years. So these are pretty impressive numbers if we can achieve circularity in the economy. So what in fact does that actually look like? We've got some good sort of tools available, and this one comes from the Netherlands, the government of the Netherlands, and they've suggested the 10 R's approach that can help understand circularity. How can a business think about achieving circularity? And it has 3 main areas: smarter product use and manufacturing, extending lifespan of products and its parts, and useful application of materials. And you see, starting at the top where the approaches are the most circular, we got approaches like refusing, rethinking approaches like making a product be more intensive in terms of its use, and also the sharing of products by consumers. There's also the reuse approach, where a product could be reused by another consumer and a discarded product reused by in another function. Other approaches, even repurposing, where a discarded product or its parts is used in a new product, or of course recycling, where processed materials are used to achieve a high grade or lower grade quality. So a whole suite of approaches here that span from sort of very circular to less circular that we can get our hands on and use in a practical way. And in fact, we'll see some examples of where this is being applied already in Manitoba directly. So for example, the rethinking of the 10 R's. We got Peg City Car Co-op in Winnipeg that you've heard of, a membership-based subscription service for cars, to get access to a cars, that offers businesses and individuals access to a vehicle on demand without the purchase. So a car co-op. So that rethinks and makes the use of an automobile more intensive for more users. So that's part of a circular economy. There's also an example here. We've got Frontiers North up in Churchill, working together with Red River Polytech and New Flyer Industries to take batteries from New Flyer built electric buses after they've gone through their original use, and repurposing them to use in tundra buggies up north in the Churchill tourist industry. So we've got a reuse approach where we're taking products that have been used and they're still usable and using them in another manner. That's circularity. And we're going to hear some more examples too from Winpack here in the discussion session here coming up in a little while. And if you've got other examples of circularity and how you've done this in your business, or how the products you're offering, we want to hear from you here in a little bit. And you can even start to put those in the chat space if you like. And thank you very much for the full report link to the supply chain report from Supply Chain Manitoba. Lots of good resources there. These links you'll be able to have access to, and we do provide the slides. You'll be able to click on these and get to these different resources. Now, this one on this slide right now, this is another one courtesy of the report that came from the Council of Canadian Academies in 2021 on the circular economy. And this is about eco-design. So this is an interesting approach that aims to make products more durable, long-lasting. It reduces energy, resources, and waste in the production process, makes them easier to use, includes reusing, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, and recycling. So a way to get started with this type of eco-design approach is to really look at the design areas of focus. And there's 5 of them here: designing for material sourcing, designing for manufacturing, designing for transportation, designing for use, and also the end-of-life use of a product, the end-of-life product. So I find this to be a super useful resource. And so, for example, in the design for material sourcing, we're looking at increasing the use of recycled materials to replace virgin materials. That's circularity. In manufacturing, looking for opportunities to reduce emissions for GHG emissions, but also water and soil emissions to waters and soils. In the design and transportation of our products, looking at minimizing product size and weight even, and looking at making it easy to use recycled materials in packaging, increases circularity. We've got design for circularity, increasing access to spare parts, also increases circularity. And for the end of life, it's actions like avoiding design elements in your products that are detrimental to recycling, that just make it hard to recycle parts of the products, and other strategies there. So this table is super useful in this eco design, or this Canadian Council of Academies report, and a number of useful links here up on the right here, including from Efficiency Manitoba, Biz for Climate. We've got the Climate Smart Training program. We got even resources on the Manitoba Chamber website, and circular economy resources again from the Government of Canada and Supply Chain Manitoba. All right, Elizabeth, I'm kind of moving not as fast as maybe anticipated, but not too bad here. I got one more slide and we'll just do a quick check-in here. Now bringing this back to carbon reductions. So we can intuitively see how these circularity approaches can help us with carbon reductions, but another useful thing to put alongside these other tools like eco-design and the 10 Rs is how businesses are being asked to report on their GHG emissions. And we have new standards emerging now that are influencing the business community. On the International Sustainability Standards Board is putting out guidance for how to disclose risks related to climate change in financial reporting. And it follows some protocols that are out there. So this protocol here from the GHG protocol website talks about the emissions, the types of emissions that a business that can come from a business. And the terminology is important here. Scope 1 emissions are these direct emissions that come from a business. Those are your company facilities, your company vehicles. There are also scope 2 emissions that come from the electricity that you do purchase and use as a business. And a scope 3 emissions are those indirect emissions that are part of your value chain, either upstream as you're creating your products. And it shows a number of sources there, of course, from the transportation, the purchased goods, the services, right into your business travel and employee commuting and your leased assets, but also your downstream value chain where your products are transported, how they're processed by users, how they're used by consumers, how they're treated at the end of life. These are all important areas where emissions could occur, and businesses that will be asked to report now voluntarily, but perhaps more required in the future. These are the types of emissions that they may have to report on. You may not think it's relevant to you, but as a supplier to some larger companies, you may eventually be asked to report on these types of emissions because they have to report on these types of emissions. And if you're part of their value chain, these are the types of things you're going to need to be keeping track of. And these things help you see where circularity can be achieved in terms of carbon reductions. All right, so that was a mouthful. I'm going to move on here to maybe Elizabeth, as we're queuing up the, if you're looking at the chat space for any questions that we need to clear the deck on here quickly. Just a little poll here for people, just quickly to digest. Which of the 10 R's approach is just at a glance? I know this is not a simple exercise, but which of the 10 R's do you think makes sense to implement potentially in your business to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So we'll just leave this on the screen here for a bit, and I can scroll down to you get to see the other options that will be on your mobile device or on the website. So all 10 R's are listed here. And you can just sort of play around a bit with that. Elizabeth, do we have any questions to clear the deck on here before we move on?
Yes, we've had a couple. One question was, do we have the consumptive percentage? And I believe that question was in relation to when you were comparing the linear economy to the circular economy, although Elaine might want to clarify if I'm incorrect.
I don't have them at my fingertips, but that's the World Circularity Gap Report that was referenced on that slide back. Presents a really nice figure that I chose not to show here just because of time, but it really talks a lot about where the carbon emissions are embedded in the different natural resource sort of use. So our use of minerals, ores, biomass, and then how we use that as a society, whether it's for transport or health care or consumables. It helps to see where the embedded emissions are, and it helps to see, where some of the leverage points for circularity might be. So, and I think it gets into the consumptive, provides stats on that. So the World Circularity Gap Report is where some of that info is.
Another question on the 10 R's. When you were referencing 10 R's, a question popped up asking whether there was similar guidance for procurement or consumption chain. So Supply Chain Manitoba responded with the report, but I didn't know if there was any further commentary you wanted to provide there.
I think, yeah, in the 10 R's report, the link from the European Union or the government of the Netherlands specifically, you will find a bit of that information. Also, the Canadian Council Academies report is quite an extensive report that gets into a lot of different aspects that I think we'll get to those details that you're looking for. And also the Supply Chain Manitoba report too is also going to have some of that information, and that really looked at a Manitoba specific picture. And thanks too if there's colleagues on the line from Supply Chain Manitoba, great that you're here, because we're really leaning on your resources in this engagement of businesses. And hopefully we can hear from you. Feel free to take the floor here in the last half hour to say a few things on that. We've got Dennis. Hey, Dennis, good to see you again. He wants to add the Carbon Hound and Green Economy Canada to the list of approaches and tools. That looks great. Dennis, I don't know if you can find a specific link for that to add in the chat space, Dennis. That will help participants get their fingers on these things a little quicker. All right, good. And thanks for going through the poll, you guys. You're playing around. It looks like recycling, intuitively recycling was one of the more, that's the one we're most familiar with, and how to make that happen. But also keep in mind too, on that linear 10 R's approach, recycling was the least circular of all the 10 R's. So we really want to press ourselves to move to the rethinking and to the reuse, the refurbishing, even the refuse approaches, really to start really thinking about embedding circularity in how we create products and services and offer services. So great, thanks for thinking about this mental exercise. All right, okay, moving on. I'm gonna try to move pretty quick on this last part, Elizabeth, so we could jump right into the discussion. I think we've done that. Okay, the last part, this kind of ties it together in a sense for everybody. Using nature-based solutions. And why I say it ties things together is because it really does help to address both your ability to enhance resilience and also to reduce carbon. And we'll have some examples here to illustrate why that is the case. So being members of MEIA, I'm sure most of you, or if not all, are quite familiar with nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure. But let's take a quick peek at some terminology here to start. Nature-based solutions, you're hearing that term. It's talking about measures that can help protect, restore, or manage nature with the aim of maintaining or enhancing services provided to people and to the environment. So it's using nature in a way to provide services, okay? You will also hear terminology, different types of terminology used. So of course, you'll hear the term natural infrastructure, and that refers to using elements of nature, preserving it, restoring, enhancing natural aspects to meet targeted infrastructure outcomes. So these are outcomes that built infrastructure is traditionally designed for, but nature in some form can then help to meet those outcomes, a lot of times in a more cost-effective and an efficient manner. If we're talking about this in the context of cities and urban contexts, the green infrastructure is used as a term quite often. And if you're specifically talking about stormwater management, you will hear the term low impact development, or LID. If you're a municipality and you are now really active in asset management, both for built and natural assets, you use the natural asset terminology, which is the stock of assets, the stock of natural resources and ecosystems that a municipal government has at its disposal, its use to provide services to communities. And so that terminology is used quite a bit. And I think it's worth just kind of noting here, just backing up to this picture again, that all this climate action is a collaborative effort. So we're talking about businesses and the climate action by SMEs, but in a lot of cases, this is partnering with municipalities, First Nations, with governments to really help enhance resilience, not only in your business, but perhaps in the local area where you are residing, or your plant is, or your facility is. But also about collaborating with municipal governments, First Nations, and other governments to reduce carbon and meet local carbon goals, but also provincial and federal goals. All right, so just the collaboration is a key piece that I maybe not have sounded off on as much yet. But let's talk about a couple of examples of nature-based solutions, just to wrap our heads around this. I moved south of the border here because this is such a good example. Dow Chemical, at one of its facilities, its petro facilities down in Texas, it was required to upgrade its water treatment processes to meet changes to US EPA regulations. And they had on the shelf a design for a wastewater treatment plant of about $40 million cost. But they sat back, and executives at the company approved the development of an engineered wetland. And this engineered wetland had a startup cost of only $1.4 million. And so they were able to achieve the built infrastructure outcomes of water treatment effectively at a significantly lower cost. At the same time, they reduced the energy consumption because they didn't need to build facilities with pumps and lights and cooling and heating systems. At the same time, they were able to enhance drought resilience to the local area by this constructed wetland. And they also provided additional habitat in the area. And it's really now one of the most popular bird count areas in the whole area. So really good example of business responding to regulation, thinking in an innovative way, and coming up with a really cost-effective solution, not only with low capital cost, but also low maintenance costs, operation and maintenance costs over time. Now, we have a number of examples of nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure in Manitoba, and here's just one just sort of in the backyard here where I'm at in Winnipeg. Of course, Manitoba Hydro and other organizations, including even the Human Rights Museum, using green roofs. And of course, that helps achieve outcomes such as reduced runoff from the roof surfaces. It helps to achieve cooling effects within the building. It also provides a good setting for employees to enjoy, providing physical and mental health benefits. We've got municipal governments using retention ponds. and wetlands, constructed wetlands in the new subdivisions. So we've got the organization Native Plant Solutions, a spinoff from Ducks Unlimited, helps local organizations and subdivisions and developers create these engineered wetlands, these constructed wetlands, to meet the targeted outcome of stormwater management, to manage water levels during extreme events. But it also provides habitat for waterfowl. It provides recreational opportunities for local residents, both winter and summer. Another third example here on the far right is John Hirsch Place in Winnipeg, sort of a little known alleyway that was converted into a Woonwurf, the city's first Woonwurf, which is a living street area. And what it does, it helps to manage stormwater. So through a series of natural catch basins here that you can see in the green areas, and also through some constructed soil cells, strata soil cells beneath the paving stones, it traps runoff under the ground where it can remove nutrients, and also the plants evapotranspire a lot of the excess runoff, and that significantly reduces the amount of water that exits the end of the alleyway into the city's combined sewer system, which is a stormwater and a sewer system. And that's important. If you live in Winnipeg, you know the importance of these big events in a combined sewer system that can result in sewer discharges if the volume of stormwater is too great. So these are three examples of natural infrastructure and green infrastructure at work. And so it could be as simple as planting trees, nature-based solutions. So we have the Canada's 2030 emissions reduction plan, and it talks about natural climate solutions, including planting trees and protecting and restoring grasslands and wetlands. These are ways to help sequester carbon. Just as improving agricultural land management practices can help store carbon, improving forest management, reducing deforestation, reducing wildfires, and enhancing the use of wood products to keep that carbon stored as long as possible. These are all helpful nature-based solutions for emissions reduction. But these are also extremely helpful for building resilience. So Canada's adaptation strategy tells us that natural infrastructure is increasingly seen as win-win solutions for traditional infrastructure outcomes, such as built infrastructure trying to achieve stormwater management. We can use nature-based solutions to help reduce stormwater and achieve other co-benefits like carbon reductions, reduced pollution to water, and physical and mental health benefits. So lots of co-benefits to provide services to communities through nature-based solutions. And just one maybe approach here to kind of help people get their feet wet on nature-based solutions. Colleagues at the United Nations CEO Water Mandate, which is a consortium of businesses around the world achieving sustainable development, the UN CEO Water Mandate produced a benefit accounting guide for nature-based solutions. And the link is shown here. And this helps with a stepwise approach for an organization to really understand the multiple benefits that nature-based solutions could provide. It helps to quantify those benefits, whether it's the amount of carbon sequestered, the amount of water stored, or the amount of nutrients removed. It helps you find ways to quantify those benefits, and then also how to value those benefits from an economic sense. So new types of cost-benefit analysis that can help you understand the dollar value of stored carbon or the dollar value of reduced nutrients. All right, so you can get started just by perusing this guide and figuring out how to kind of march through and see if nature-based solutions can help you out. But there's lots of materials out there to help you. The Manitoba Climate Resilience Training course, training program has a number of courses, including on natural infrastructure. That's available right there. So this 10 minutes we spent here is a good hour-and-a-half webinar that you'll see our colleague Kurt Hall had moderated and I was part of. You'll see other webinars for free on the MCRT website. There's also guides on the business case for natural infrastructure from the City of Toronto, We've got guides from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development as well. The International Institute for Sustainable Development has got its own nature-based infrastructure global resource center, which is a global hub for using nature-based solutions. And also locally, they have a new natural infrastructure for water solutions on the prairies initiative, where a lot of this stuff is being thought about across the prairies. Okay, running out of breath, Elizabeth. And that's a good thing because it's time for me to be quiet. Just any sort of, do we have to clear the air on anything specifically on this last topic of nature-based solutions?
Yes, we did have a question from someone asking whether you could please clarify who is conducting climate risk assessment of the Manitoba and Nunavut supply chain.
That was work done quite a while ago now, back in 2015. That was led by the University of Winnipeg's Northern Sustainable Prosperity Initiative, and together with International Institute for Sustainable Development, and also Stantec Engineering did the PIVC risk assessments, yeah, ISD, and I was involved in helping lead the scenario exercise. So that's back quite a few years ago.
Thanks, Darren. And just one final comment. If time permits, Rick Reed is with us from Supply Chain Manitoba, and he'd be happy to discuss the report.
Perfect. Rick, that's exactly where we're going to right now, I think, here. So let's, without further ado, let's get to this discussion part. So Rick, just you stay tuned in here. We're going to go first, though, to Alex. So before we maybe go to Rick, we're going to go to Alex here to share some examples. But let me set this up first, Alex. So we want to hear from everyone that's online here, examples of how you've taken climate action in any of these areas. And how we're going to do that here is we're going to use a virtual wall space. And this will allow me to take some notes, but it'll also allow you as a participant to directly put in your example right to the website. So this is called Padlet. If you haven't used this before, you can scan the barcode on the right, and it'll take you right to the website where you can, on your phone or your computer, you can add an example to any of these three areas. So, and if you don't have, you can't scan this on your mobile phone, you can, there's a link there at the bottom of the screen, and let me put that in. I have that link I can put in the chat space here right now. You can type that link directly in a moment here. Let me get to it. Sorry, let me put this in the chat space just quickly. Okay, so if you can't get, you can type the link I just put in the chat space. That'll take you to this page. Oops, sorry. And you can access this. And what we want to hear is examples. So have you assessed climate risk and enhanced resilience in your organization? Or do you provide products and services to help others do that? We want to hear from you. You can type in something here and post it. You can even put a link to your website. If you've done work on reducing carbon, using the circular economy or in other ways, we want to hear from you. If you use nature-based solutions, or if you help others to use nature-based solutions or reduce carbon, we want to hear from you. You have access to this website. Feel free to post stuff, and it will appear. And I'm just going to open up this site here right now. So on the screen, this will start to populate, and I'm going to add some notes here. So that's how we'll go about tracking some conversation here over the next half hour. But to kind of warm up the sharing of examples, I want to introduce Alex Roundtree, who's the Environment and Health and Safety Manager at WinPack here in Winnipeg. And if you've ever been to their website, you will see right away that they've internalized this whole circular economy approach in the way they do their business and in the products and services they deliver. So Alex, thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'll just quickly just touch on our vision, basically just do a quick run through. It's to excel in the sustainability business practice to create products, processes, and services that deliver net positive economical and social and environmental benefits while growing profitability and responsibility. We're looking at sustainable practices that are part of our daily processes. We incorporate in all our strategic planning. We try and come up with different thought patterns and ways to deal with our product from the beginning phases right through. Our research and development group is constantly looking at our products and adjusting to the demands. As we all know, with the government regulation changes with single-use plastics, it's driven a lot of change. So some of the things that we're looking at is our commitment to being a responsible corporate citizen. And with that commitment, we want to embrace principles of sustainable material management and circular economy. So currently right now, we incorporate renewable energy resources where appropriate. We limit waste in our product and processes. We've been tasked with our corporate goal of having zero landfill waste by 2025, which, as you think about your home, how many people live in your house, how much garbage you produce in a week. We've got 1,000 individuals here, not including our processes. So that's a little bit of a commitment on us to drive. Also innovating packaging that's recyclable now, contains recyclable content, or it's compostable. That's a big thing for us to focus on. And also utilizing life cycle analysis to understand our environmental impacts on our packaging in order to make informed decisions. So part of this also our drive is that we do 40% of the electricity uses from renewable resources. 40% of our rigid packaging is recyclable or recycle ready. 40% of our convertible films sold by Winpack Films are recyclable ready. And then our CO2, our packaging extends the shelf life, which also reduces food waste, because we know food waste creates its own off-gassing as well. And that's a big, big factor when you start looking at the numbers of that. And that sort of drove our packaging changes. On top of that, we have a lot of different recycling programs to try and generate out different streams for our waste. Everything from our plastics, our clears, our printed, our woods, any type of batteries, paper, cardboard, all that's recyclable. So we push those in the right streams. And we constantly just keep revamping and looking at our energy consumption within the company. For those that have toured through our facility, you probably wouldn't have realized this, but our production floor is heated by machinery. We don't have HVAC systems heating our production floor. So when we shut down at Christmas time, or not really shut down, but go to skeleton crew, you can tell the difference on our production floor because our temperatures drop slightly. But most of our heating is done strictly by machinery. So that helps save our consumption as well. But the biggest part is driving our product to have better off uses at the end, or make it recyclable or reusable. And that's what the driving process is now. So hopefully that helps get a little bit of the thought pattern going for you.
Oh, it absolutely does, Alex. Thanks. We've used this approach, this terminology, the home game and an away game of a business, and how to take climate action. And I think you've really nicely highlighted how that's really a useful way to view it. You got your products, and you listed many ways you've used circularity. You've also, I think the example of how you're using machinery to heat your facilities is such a classic example of the home game, and how you've really looked at how to really improve and reduce carbons that way. How, just maybe for others that are maybe thinking about this, how did you know, I'm just curious on your internal facilities and how you started to use machinery to heat facilities. How did you get to that point? Were there some assessments that you did early on to figure out, okay, where's the big bang for the buck in terms of carbon reductions, and did that help inform that particular approach, or did that just sort of was that the intuitive one that you guys landed on early on?
A little bit of both. It came out of just the natural driving of the processes, but we also did the hydro assessment program, looking at ways to save energy as well. We have our own engineering department that's constantly has a mandate to try and reduce our energy as well, our outputs. And it's typically a 3 to 5% reduction every year we're trying to succeed with if we can. And we know at one time we'll end up hitting a plateau, but we're still trying to fight on that one as well. Oh,
those are superb examples. Also thinking too, and I mean, you do so much on your product end in terms of how to embed circularity into that. Has the conversation around the circular economy, I mean, how long have you been hearing about that, and how has the international sort of discussion on that, or even just south of the border, what has been sort of some of the motivating factors for you guys, or where did the understanding of circularity come from? Where were you hearing about it first?
We've had basically a corporate commitment for, I know for the last 5 years here, is look at circular economy, just from the top couple of individuals I'm working with closely. We also have offices or buildings across the border as well, and then into Mexico. And so we have a group that meets every month, every second month, and this is part of our discussions as well. How to reuse our processes, our products, where we can offset them to different locations that might reuse them. And then also looking how they're using the energy conservation programs as well.
Excellent. Alex, thank you a ton, literally, for those examples. Very much appreciated. And I posted your website on the in the reducing carbon emissions via the circular economy. You'll see your wind pack. I just added your website, but if you want to add in another post with some more detail there, for sure, I just put a link to your sustainability page.
Perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of reported information in there that's public knowledge, so feel free to look at it. It might give you some different ideas as well.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right, so that's good motivation for everyone to think about sharing examples, and feel free, you can now start to put your hand up. You can use the raise hand function, which should be one of the tools under the 3 dots or somewhere in your menu bar, and that will flag to Elizabeth that you may want to take the floor, and feel free to turn your camera on and share. But while you're doing and getting the courage to do that, I want to go over to Rick Reed with Supply Chain Manitoba, and just a big thanks, Rick, for all the materials you guys have prepared on the circular economy. Tell us what you've done, what you've been doing, and just, what of this conversation so far are you seeing that are the exciting areas going forward here in Manitoba?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for using our work to help push this forward. Supply Chain Manitoba, we wear a lot of hats, but we recognized a while ago that circularity, sustainability are going to become a more critical piece to industry and everybody moving forward. And if you're not moving in that direction now, you're going to get left behind at some point. And supply chain is generally the means by which you're going to accomplish a lot of that, because it's how you deliver your goods and services. It's, who you choose to purchase from, what transportation services you use. Everything is around supply chain decisions are going to make a big difference on whether you can move to circularity or not. So recognizing that, that's why we've invested time into, the report, and we're doing some other things. The report you've shared has 15 recommendations. We're currently in the development of doing our plan to start figuring out what of those recommendations we're going to work on right away. And if there's anybody on this call or that would like to participate in any of those things, certainly I would appreciate if you give us a call, because we're always welcoming anybody that wants to help us move forward. So that's certainly there. We are working on, currently we just received some funding. We're going to be working on a supply chain assessment tool from a circularity context. So it's going to be designed to have small, medium enterprises that are able to have an assessment done to determine where their risks are, where they're doing well, where they're not doing, where there's opportunities to do better, and to help them set up a plan to move towards circularity. And that is about to start in the next month or so. So forgive me, I got a phone going there and somebody will pick it up hopefully. So that's something else that we would certainly be looking for anybody that's interested in participating in that, and perhaps participating in a pilot on that sort of thing. We would certainly like to go. So that's coming down the pipe. And just the important thing is that get people together. There's lots of good things that are happening. One thing that we haven't done, I appreciate Manitoba Chambers by doing this, is making people aware of the good things that are going on is one of the first steps in helping us all start moving in that direction. So I thank you, Darren, and your team for doing this and helping to raise the awareness of it. And hopefully together we can find some common projects and help move the needle forward a little bit. So thank you.
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much, Rick. And I think your phone ringing was probably someone from this webinar here that's already trying to get a hold of you. You've provided a link to your report, I think, in the chat space. If you want to add a few more links, even to the Padlet here as well, to specific materials, including if there's anything already available on that supply chain assessment tool, be great to provide those links. Or we'll be doing a series of these forums too, so we can, as that material comes available, you can let us know. The supply chain assessment tool is particularly interesting because that we heard from Alex how important the sort of that GHG sort of assessment that they did through, I guess, Hydro early on to figure out where their emissions were, how that was useful in helping their strategies and action plans. So this supply chain assessment tool from a circularity perspective.
Actually, you just tweaked my memory because I forgot about another important one we're doing that fits into that. Is we also have what we call a supply chain links tool. And what it is actually is, it's a supply chain mapping tool that's past its first beta stage, and we're going to be doing more development on it. But it's a mapping tool that you can essentially map your supply chain. It can be used in sourcing. It can be evaluating your current supply chain. And we're on to the next phase where we're going to be applying some more funding to it. That's going to allow people to do exactly what you talk about, is to, instead of, you know, just a straight up dollars, you know, I'm looking at this option in the traditional sense of which should I buy because of dollars and cents. It's going to throw in the environment piece to it, to throw another cost. So when you look at a total cost of ownership, it's not your traditional lead times and costs. It's going to be, you know, lead times, cost, plus impact on the environment. So you can make your choices. So it'll make it visible for that. So again, that's another tool that it's another project that's being worked on. So if anybody wants to be interested in participating, but because it's another one that's coming down the pipe that kind of fits into what you're talking about as well. And the key about supply chains, if I can just throw one more thing in, is they only work when all the parties are integrated and pulling in the same direction. You can't, it's not about just purchasing in your own four walls and worrying about that. You have to worry about the partners that you're working with upstream and down. And that's what supply chain is about. And we're trying to develop tools that will help, you know, business, particularly small, medium, you know, have those tools so they can have a better job of understanding where they are, where they need to be, and what that gap is, and to help them, you know, close that gap and become more successful and profitable. So, and hopefully we can, you know, find some partners on this, Manitoba Chambers included, to help people succeed, because that's in everybody's interest if business succeeds.
Excellent. Yeah, that's I guess, you know, we saw just the critical nature of supply chains through the COVID pandemic, and sort of how essential it is to build resilience in supply chains and thinking of them from a systems perspective. So thank you for bringing this really to the fore here in this discussion, because not only do we see the importance of assessing risk and building resilience in supply chains, we now see through these tools that you're offering the leverage points for reducing carbon and achieving circularity across the supply chain, whether it's upstream in your value chain or downstream in your products and services. So this is such a critical area, and we are going to be hearing more and more about this going forward. So thank you very much, Rick.
No problem. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Darren, for an engaging discussion and for providing all the webinar participants with incredibly valuable information today. I think it was very well received based on the comments we've had in the chat. And thank you to everyone for being here today and for your meaningful contributions. It wouldn't have been possible to have such a successful webinar without your participation. I will now ask Jack to provide some closing comments on behalf of MIA. Jack?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, I think what strikes me as exciting about this webinar today is, I mean, you've labeled this as tools, a toolkit, and the amount of tools in the toolbox, to use that analogy, compared to when the Chamber started this project and MIA was a part of it with our Climate Smart program, that the tools have increased exponentially, and it's part of the ecosystem, I think, that we have here in Manitoba. And as I mentioned early on the outset, we're a sector council, as is Supply Chain Manitoba, and we've been collaborating on these fronts and providing more deliverables for industry. And as part of that, we're all trying to find our niche to see where we can provide education, awareness, and training. You know, the great work that Supply Chain Manitoba has been doing, the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training Program, is another incredible set of work that's been done. You know, there's other organizations that are getting involved with this, and I want to point out the Chartered Professional Accountants. That organization is really driving a lot of deliverables on circularity and reporting on financial and environmental and ESG. And so I encourage you to check out their website as well. And on that front, there is I think regulatory and policy that is coming is already impacting us all as industry, and there's more coming. So this is a way to get prepared. It's a way to thrive and adapt to make us more competitive. And that's why I love the example. And there's other examples than just WindPack that are out there. They're thriving and being more competitive, being more profitable by the things that they're doing on circularity and sustainability. And that's the message we want to get out. And as I said, we're all trying to, as the sector councils and as post-secondaries and other nonprofit associations like the Engineer and Geoscience Association, we're all trying to figure out, what's the best programming that we can equip the SMEs with. Like I said on the outset, there's large corporations that are already on this curve, and if they're not, they're falling behind. But I think we need to establish some help for SMEs, and so that's part of this toolkit and exercise with the chamber. And on that, I just want to mention we are going to be working with the chamber on submitting a survey on sustainability and ESG. We're expected to put that out in April. It's really building on some of the things that Supply Chain Manitoba has already done with their survey and their deliverables, but also trying to get a baseline on where SMEs are at, because there's not much data out there, and it'll help us know where the low-hanging fruit is to provide more education and awareness so that we can be more competitive in Manitoba. So yeah, with that, thank you everyone for participating, and look forward to collaborating more.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thank you again to the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association for hosting this webinar today. And thank you also to Darren Swanson, Novel Futures, for your incredible insight and the valuable information that you've shared. So what's next for us? This was our first forum. So thank you everybody for participating in our first virtual forum. We have many more in-person and virtual forums planned throughout the months of April and May. Our in-person forums are planned with local chambers of commerce, and our webinars are being held in collaboration with associations. The next webinar will be hosted by the Women's Enterprise Center on April 4th. So we will be using the insights gleaned and the lessons learned from these forums to update the Manitoba Chamber's Climate Action Toolkit. This will involve updating the primers on climate action, providing new case examples in Manitoba businesses who have successfully implemented climate action, as well as a synthesis of barriers and barrier busters. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce or me personally, or the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association.